So good morning, my name's Gareth Brown. I work at Sytec. You can follow me on Twitter instantly at Gareth Brown. And if you do send any tweets today, hashtag is #ComLive. If you're a shrinking violet and prefer not to tweet, you can still follow the tweets. Hashtag is #ComLive. So this session is about workflow rules. And I'm a great workflow rules advocate. But before I go into my presentation, I picked up and I made some notes when Mark Catini was talking in the keynote earlier that I saw some resonance with that would link in nicely with this. So if you'll forgive me just for a few seconds, I'm going to quickly give you a summary using some of the language that Mark spoke about. I'm going to take it in sort of reverse order. And to me, running Autotask is about having scalability. And scalability is there for one reason, and that's to drive some profit. So some of the things that Mark talked about were improving the relationship with the customer. Well, improving the relationship with the customer is about improving satisfaction. And improving satisfaction is simply about reducing the time it takes to follow up on a commitment that you've made. Now, you could call that reducing the sales cycle. You could suggest it might be reducing the service cycle. And I'll come back to a couple of those points in a minute. But what I wanted to talk about was how you can do that using workflow. So you don't need to become an octopus with 8 arms and legs. You can do this with some workflow and then manage by exception. So things that don't happen automatically, you manage by exception. And I think that's the skill. Actually, I've got a pet saying in Sytec, and that is, people have skills, organisations have processes. So if you've got an organisation, you can workflow your process using Autotask workflow. So what I've tried to do here is give you my opinion on what I think what is workflow. So it's an arrangement of processes. So there's a key word in here, and it's not process, it's an arrangement. And if you keep that in mind when we're thinking about some of this, they're objective-based, they're repeatable, and they've got some defined outcomes. When I say defined, I want you to hear desirable. So what we're trying to do is reverse engineer this relationship with the customer so that you're writing the headline first of something that's happened before you've actually delivered the project. So that's a process that we go through at Sytec. When we win a new customer, we write a headline, but in 6 months' time, in 3 months' time, next week, whatever the timescale is, when we finish the project, this is the headline that we'd like them to say. So we've now got a defined outcome. Okay, so talk about workflow. So when's it best to use workflow? Well, I'm going to let you into a secret all the time. The answer is all the time. There are some things that workflow doesn't do, and that's why we have humans, but for the rest of the time, there is a management function that can be incorporated into workflow. I need to tell you a bit about myself before I go into this slide, because I'm not sure it comes up better on the screen than it does on mine. But I need to tell you something about me, because as an individual, I'm a project-related person. That means I get bored eventually and want to go off and do something more exciting. And I call that projects. And so, from a very early stage, about 1977, I built my first computer. You couldn't go to a shop and buy a computer. There weren't any shops around that sold computers. There actually weren't any computers around. But you could buy a kit. And you could buy a kit that happened to be 3 or 4 pages of A4 that told you how to assemble transistors, resistors and switches and LEDs. And you could build a computer. And so when I was 8, I built my first computer. But I have to go back a little bit further, actually, because before that, I was into break fix. Well, actually, I was mostly into break. But I would use my family's household appliances to try and optimise them. So things like the toaster and the vacuum cleaner are actually compatible. And so, by doing all this breaking, you end up doing a lot of fixing. Otherwise, you end up being in a lot of trouble. And so, from a very early age, break fix was where I was coming from. And I think that's important to understand, because from my perspective, there is a flow of something breaks, something happens, something gets fixed. Everybody today talks about managed services, but I think a large part of managed services includes break fix. And if you can follow my thinking so far, and if you can't, forgive me, but if you follow my thinking so far, you'll see that workflow fits very neatly into break fix. So a little bit more about Sytec. Sytec started in 1992. There wasn't an interweb. There wasn't the connected people that we have today, social networks and things. Actually, Sytec started because I knew some people who, when I got overwhelmed with work, I could ring them up. I'm sort of reluctant to say that I rang them up on my mobile, because actually we didn't have mobile phones. And quite often I would have to go to the supermarket because I was out on site with a customer to use the payphone in the supermarket to go and ring someone else for some advice. And the reason I mention that is because actually I'm a very visual person. And so within our business, every wall was covered in whiteboards. Actually, there's a blog post on the Autotask website about the whiteboard experience, and if you search for it, I'm pretty sure you'll find it. You'll see there's a couple of pages about my ideas about moving from whiteboards into Autotask. But that aside, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because this by itself, workflow, is actually quite a straightforward concept. And if you look at this slide, it looks, if you haven't seen it before, increasingly difficult to understand. So what I've done here is pulled up the slide I had previously and stuck in some very, very basic detail. And I'm going to go through it because it really is quick enough to go through. This workflow produces a ticket advice. And if you can read, you can probably see that it's when a critical ticket is idle for 60 minutes, I want something to happen. So you can imagine there's a process on the back of this where an engineer or an account manager, or perhaps me or one of my directors, has made a promise to a customer. And the promise is, invest your IT into us, and if nothing happens for 60 minutes, I will personally take some accountability for that. I will do something. Something will happen. The workflow is actually really straightforward, and if you've seen this before, this is probably the most basic workflow you can get, but it's actually also one of the most powerful ones. And if you haven't seen it before, let me take you through it. Because effectively what we're saying is, in the service desk, when a ticket is idle for 60 minutes, and a couple of conditions are met, do something. Do something. Now you can see this management by exception, this only kicks off when something doesn't happen. So there's a great idea in here about being able to use this to leverage your time more wisely. I no longer have to think about all the 5 things I promised in the last sales meeting. I can put them into workflow. This is another example. And the reason I'm sharing this one is, if you haven't looked at workflow so far, you're missing something seriously large in Autotask. But if you have, you'll already know that there are 3 distinct areas of workflow within Autotask. This is CRM, which is different to what I've just shown you a second ago, which was Service Desk, which is different to what I was talking about earlier with projects. There are 3 distinct areas of workflow. Actually, I counted up how many different conditions you can have as triggers, and there's something like 100 conditions within Autotask that will trigger a notification or trigger an action. That's really powerful. I can't actually think of 100 things, so Autotask is already ahead of me on that. Let's quickly go through this. So this is a real straightforward one. Actually, this is a pair. There's another one very similar, but if I explain this one, you'll understand the pair. This workflow essentially says, we've got a customer, and when an opportunity comes in, I want someone else to be aware of it. So let's read this. When an opportunity is created, and the following conditions are met, which is account type as a customer, then do something. So what am I doing? Well, I'm notifying the account manager that an engineer has found an opportunity on one of his customers. He no longer has to wait until he sees Steve or sees Alex to say, oh, do you know, there was an opportunity, and I can't remember what it was, but it was a really good one. So we no longer have that issue because we use a workflow. Now, if you remember, I said that there are a pair of these, and if you're really smart, you can guess that the other one is when it's not a customer. So when they're not a customer, they're a prospect, or they're a lead, or they're part of a campaign, perhaps. And so we've got another workflow that's paired with this. It does exactly the same thing, but of course it doesn't go to an account manager because a prospect doesn't have an account manager necessarily. I'm a visual person. This is another way of describing a workflow. So what does a workflow do? Well, you can create a to-do. This is one of the most powerful aspects within Autotask. We talked about accountability earlier. Accountability is me saying, I will take responsibility for doing that. Accountability comes with a time frame. So generally you say, yeah, I'll do that within 10 minutes or this week or never. There's notifications in there, and the one I'm calling out on this particular slide in the bottom right hand corner is email. So you can trigger an email. The internet was born on the back of email, and we're still using email today. You can update field variables, and I want you to think about that for a second, because even if you don't know what update field variables actually means, we're going to come back to that in a second. I've already told you what the most powerful thing in Autotask is with regards to workflow, and it's create to-dos, but forget that, because the most powerful thing in Autotask with workflows is to update field variables. Workspace alerts, another favourite of mine, and if you're not using email to notify your engineers, this is another really smart way of leveraging their time within Autotask to get messages across. The messages can be really low profile. You don't need to update everybody about everything all the time. So I mentioned there's three areas. There's three main areas where workflow rules apply. CRM, projects and project tasks, and service desk tickets. And the most mature part of workflow rules, in terms of how I use it, is within service desk. And if you imagine that we are a break-fix business, and actually when I do certified partner consulting for Autotask, and I look at other businesses and help them with their live reports and their workflows too, and actually I've spotted 3 or 4 CCPs in the audience. My tip, just as a quick tangent, is to find someone who is similar in their outlook to you, who is a CCP, an Autotask certified consulting partner, and get the details and work with them. But nevertheless, my approach to workflow is from an engineering perspective. So I want to understand what happens. I want to understand why that happens. There's a gap to bridge, otherwise there wouldn't be a business. And I like to reverse engineer it. And do you remember I talked about the defined outcomes? And when I say defined, you have to hear desirable. You've got to be writing the headline for the project before you've started the project. That's a desirable outcome. And if you haven't done that before, it's a really useful exercise. And the next time you win a cloud-based transition, Office 365 perhaps, Google Apps perhaps, before you go off and deploy any resources, sit down with the lead on that project and ask them, what is the headline that you're trying to get out of this project? If we had a case study on this particular project, what would you want the headline to say? So you can imagine the headline on the case study is, what do you want that to say? The text underneath, great, but what do you want the headline to say? That now is the desired outcome. That can be workflowed. Does anybody actually do that? Raise your hand if you use that sort of process. Yeah, so 3 or 4 people are using that. I would imagine there's some great opportunity there to talk to the people who have just raised their hands and find out how they're doing it, because I bet they're doing it differently to me. Design the workflow towards the desired outcome. I've already mentioned that I'm a visual person, and what I've tried to capture in this slide actually is the workflow that I threw up on the wall that looked extremely complex if you haven't seen workflow before. West Coast printers. They're based on the west coast of England, no surprise there. A lady called Becky, small business, maybe 10 or 15 people. Half of them use computers, half of them use presses to do printing and things like that. Becky pays my bill. So when she calls in, I want to give her more care and attention. And do you remember I said that there's some exceptions to workflow? One of the exceptions is that human bit, the bit that makes you say, actually, I'll take care of that. Well, having just told you that, we actually workflow this so that when an incident comes in from Becky, and it's usually to do with Excel, we can give it a priority response. So priority response, what does that mean? Well, in this case, West Coast enjoy 25-minute response. So they might send in an email, they might pick up the phone, there might be something on social media, or they might see an engineer. All of these mights, all of those sentences begin with might. I need to workflow it, I need to capture that information. I do that within a workflow, because I then need to start a clock counting to say, after 25 minutes, if we haven't done anything, I'm about to break my promise. And if I break my promise, I'm going to lose some satisfaction. She won't tell me that. She won't say, Gareth, you did 26 minutes, expected 25, losing satisfaction. However, she'll be losing satisfaction. And over the profile of the relationship with that customer, you can trend where the incidents happen. What am I doing with this workflow? I'm simply escalating by making the ticket a priority ticket. I'm also doing something else. I'm notifying Alex. I might have mentioned Alex earlier. Alex runs the service desk and looks after, in this case, West Coast's residents. But let me tell you a story, actually, because although Sytec's been running 21 years for 2 months, way back in those days, I took a holiday once, and my younger brother, he's 4 years younger than me, he's in the Royal Air Force, very technical, something to prove, because he's 4 years younger than me. I'm going to take a holiday. And Michael stepped up and said, Gareth, I'll run the business. Okay, I took a holiday. I didn't take a mobile phone, I didn't have mobile phones. There was no interweb, couldn't connect to the internet. So anytime he wanted to ring me, he had to ring the hotel. I'd get a message through underneath my door saying, Michael's called, call him back. I then had to call him back, find out he wasn't at home. It was a disaster. But I trusted him. And the reason I'm telling you this story is when I got back, I'd only gone a week. I said, tell me, how did it go? Oh, great, don't worry about a thing. Really great, I really enjoyed it. I've got a speeding ticket, I've got parking fines, but I loved it. I said, okay, great, well thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed it. But the reason I'm telling you this is because the next week, when I turned back up to my office, a customer rang through. Well, we weren't using Autotask then, but we did have whiteboards. And if you've been to my office, and a couple of people here have been to my office, you'll know that we draw on the windows now. The whiteboards have gone, we draw on the windows. But nevertheless, customer rings in. Oh, morning here, it's Gareth. Oh, Gareth, can I speak to Michael? No, Michael isn't here. He was looking after the business while I was away on holiday in Lanzarote last week, or wherever it was. Oh. I said, what's the problem? Oh, one of our machines has failed, and I was hoping that you could come in. Actually, I was hoping Michael could come in. Well, Michael doesn't work. He's in the RAF. He's got a full-time job. He generously gave me some of his leave and came in and covered. Yeah, but Michael responds straight away. What? So I'm going to get in the car now. No, Michael was here in 15 minutes. I can't deliver that. And so where I'm taking this story is, workflow provides consistency. And so if I'm promising you that I'm going to deliver something within 25 minutes, and then I deliver it in 12 minutes, do you know the day I deliver it in 25 minutes, are you going to be happy? I say, Gareth, it took twice as long. Last week was great. What happened this week? I'll say, I'll refer you to our contract that said 25 minutes. And I'll challenge you to go to the market space and find something that's better than 25 minutes. Because you remember when we sat down a year ago and you said, Gareth, I'd like to look after a business because 25 minutes sounds really great. But now I'm unhappy because last week you did 12 minutes. So workflow brings consistency. And what I'm describing here is how we use workflow within Sytec to train our customers to have an expectation. And that's really important. Because I don't want to have to think about 25 minutes for them, 15 minutes for them. Quickly summarise using my visual aid here. What did that workflow do? That workflow sent an email to notify, to remind Alex, actually Becky needs some advice. Her Excel's crashed, and it could be that she's about to pay us. So we'd quite like to get that fixed. Also going to update some field variables. And if you remember what field variables I was updating, it was the status. It was the priority. Those are really important. If you use workflow, you'll already recognise, perhaps, you'll already have some clicks going in your mind, that if you can update the variables on one workflow, and you can read the variables on another workflow, these workflows click together. There's a second side to this. This is still West Coast printers. I thought you said 25 minutes. Okay, well I don't want to break a promise here, so I'm going to give myself a different target. And I'm going to say, if something hasn't happened within 20 minutes, notify Martin. Who's Martin? Martin runs the account there. So Martin runs West Coast's account, and we want him to know that everything that happens at West Coast is within 25 minutes. He gets 5 minutes warning that something isn't happening. That's really powerful. The idea is this workflow never triggers. The idea is this workflow never triggers, and that we've done something. If it does trigger, we're managing now by exception. You can imagine if it triggered all the time, Martin's going to leave. Alex is going to get a bit annoyed. So what does this workflow do? It sends an email. Okay, so the idea behind this presentation was how I simplified workflow, and I've sort of taken you from when I was 7 to where I am now, 27. And one of the things that I've described so far is all of these really individual companies. West Coast is an example. Here's some more, 6 or 7 companies here. I've made the same rash promise to most of them. 25 minutes, half an hour. How many workflows are there here? There's what appears to be perhaps a dozen or 15. And we're getting into something which, if you have more than 15 customers in this case, or more than 7 customers perhaps, could be quite unmanageable. So how do you deal with this? And if you remember the headline, it's about how you can use workflow to improve efficiency by simplifying workflow, and here's how you do it. So I've taken Becky out, I've taken West Coast printers out. I've called this the first response group. So anybody who's within the first response group, that could be a company, that could be an individual, that could be a vendor. So you might have a relationship that requires you to meet a commitment with a vendor in terms of doing something. All goes in the first response group. And this is really easy to read, and hopefully you've already read this. So a customer has an incident, there's a priority response associated to that. We escalate the incident, we notify someone. And then, hopefully, the second doesn't trigger. If there is a customer incident, and we're getting near the cut-off time, we get a second alert. Okay, wait. What does first response group do? What is first response group? Is that a variable within workflow, within Autotask? Of course it's not. If you've used workflow, you'll have already identified that there are operators. So we've talked about the variables. Variables might be status, for example. There are operators. I'll give you an example of an operator. An operator is equals. So if status equals critical, we looked at that very early on. There are 11 operators. Now, I can't stand on the stage and tell you what they all are. There are so many operators to get in my head. I can't talk about 11 operators. I talk about the ones that we use. So, he's a member of a list. Really powerful operator. You can suddenly see that the list is called First Response Group. The members of the list are my VIP customers who have and enjoy a 25-minute response. They're within a list. So I no longer have to look at individual customers. Actually, this is becoming scalable. One of the things Mark Catini talked about this morning was the scalability of the business within Autotask's toolkit. And I think that was the piece that resonated with me. About 2.5 or 3 years ago, when I first met Mark Banfield at the Richmond office, the very first Richmond office, Mark showed me Autotask. And I'm a great believer. I run a break-fix business. So if something breaks, we fix it. Well, I met Mark, and Mark said to me, you should use Autotask. All MSPs are going to use Autotask. I thought, well, I'm not an MSP. But actually, I'm still providing a service, and that's the key. I am a service provider. Your definition of managed is different to mine of break-fix, but we're still a service provider. And I still advocate that if you're running IT, actually, if you're running a business, you can use Autotask. So what I've shown on here, really simple to wrap that slide, is you don't need, if you've got 300 customers, to have 600 workflows to do what I've just described. It can all be managed within 2. I'm a very visual person. This is the slide to remember, because this is what workflow does. You can create a to-do. Does anybody use Exchange? Yeah, of course. Half the people here use Exchange. A to-do within workflow syncs to Exchange. And if your engineers are running a mobile phone perhaps, or they've got Outlook on their desktop, they will get the to-dos within Exchange. And suddenly, even if they're not logged into Autotask, if they're in the car, if they're with a customer, they will see a to-do come up. And what is a to-do? It's holding someone accountable to do something. They have to complete the to-do, and if you make it very straightforward, it's really straightforward to complete the to-do. Mark it off. I've just held that person accountable to doing something. So the skill that we have is breaking things down into really simple steps and taking those simple steps forward using to-dos to manage that project through successfully. But not just successfully as in the project's finished, successfully to the desired outcome. The desired outcome is the headline. And remember, we talked about the headline really early on. So we're designing the desired outcome. We're almost writing the case study with Autotask workflow in mind. Oh crikey, it gets technical now. So, workflow rules. This is the service desk. This is my favourite workflow. If you remember, the other ones are projects and project tasks, CRM. CRM, sales opportunities. But this is service desk, and primarily because stuff breaks, we fix it, we use it as a service desk. And the workflows, well, there are 37 conditional attributes. Frankly, what does that mean? What's a conditional attribute? Well, it's a variable that you can have a condition attached to. So let me explain that. I've given you a couple of examples, there are 35 others. The account name. The conditional flow here is when the account name is in a group, or when the account name is the vendor's name. So if I've got a relationship with Microsoft and I've made a promise to them, I could have a workflow for this. What could that workflow do? Every time Microsoft contact me, I could automatically send an email to my partner account manager. Frankly, I no longer have to do that. There are some really interesting attributes. 37 is a list, isn't it? I mean, that is a list. I'm not going to remember to tell you what all of those are. So I'm going to share a couple of strange ones. I think they're strange. I'm going to call them out. If you've used Autotask, did you know you can have a key account icon? You can have a pretty picture. We've got some hammers next to ours, different coloured. We've got some dots and symbols and numbers and things. And all the key account numbers, all the key account icons allow us to group the different accounts. But you can use the key account icon within the workflow. And so if you're already using the key account icon as a visual prompt to do something, there might be another way to use it. You could use it to do some customized workflow using some variables which aren't in Autotask. I'm going to come back to this in a second, because this is the difference between having a community where we can all have a discussion about how we use workflow, and you'll hear people say you can't do customized workflow, you can't have custom variables within workflow. You can, you just have to use them in a different way. And if you're not using key account icon, for example, another one might be market segment. There is a variable, there's an attribute, a variable within Autotask called market segment. And if you're not using market segment, you could use that as a user-defined field. It doesn't have to hold market segment data. It doesn't have to say industry type, laser beams, space program. You might use something for something else. And if you've got workflow developed, and if you've got whiteboards and windows like mine, you will have workflow developed. You can start to use UDF, user-defined fields, using some of these more unusual attributes. Does anybody use workflow in that sort of way, as a sort of custom way of managing things which aren't out the box? Yeah, okay, quite a few. I discovered this on the community boards. So when you log into Autotask, and you can go into the community boards, and I still remember bulletin boards, so it's like a bulletin board to me, and people post things up and there's a discussion. That's where I discovered that you can do that. There's some brilliant ideas in there. If you've got a relationship with your CCP, it's really easy to talk that sort of level, because they'll have done it before, not only for their own business, but perhaps for all the implementations that they've done. Let's give you an idea, actually, to give you an idea of scale. Over the last year or so that I've been CCP, I've looked at about 25 other businesses. So 10 years ago I would have called them perhaps competitors. Today they're just other businesses. They just happen to be doing IT. They just happen to be doing IT in a similar way to the way we do IT, using Autotask. And so that relationship building exercise that's going on right now, where you should be identifying the people who raise their hands. Raise your hands if you're a CCP. Michael, there's a few in the house. So there are 14 CCPs at this event. They should be wearing blue t-shirts like me. Okay, so there are 14 or 15 CCPs around. There's a great community. There's other Autotask experts. One of the questions was from Michael. If you're interested in API integration within Autotask, he is the go-to person. He's the person that I would go to if I had a question on that. Community is the key to Autotask. That's what makes it different to all the other pieces. My name's Gareth Brown. I'm on Twitter. If there's anything I can do to help you, I'd be pleased to. Thank you very much.